This isn't a steak. Why would you call it that on your menu?
I don't know what to tell you, man.
Just give me all the bacon and eggs you have. Wait. I worry what you just heard was, give me a lot of bacon and eggs. What I said was, give me all the bacon and eggs you have. Do you understand?
Honey, do you think KFC's still open?
Well, Ray was always uncomfortable eating with the family. I mean, after all, we do use knives and forks.
Grand opening, grand closing.
If you want to throw hands at James Brown, I'm sorry, you're a goner.
The dream has no memory of that.
We're not going to let Joe Biden and Kamala Harris cut America's meat.
We have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok.
I'm seeing a lot of confusion in these chubby Whataburger faces.
Jenny Slate has to go to jail. Mr. Dynamite, the amazing Mr. Please Please himself, the star of the show, James Brown and the Famous Flame.
Hello and welcome to All of the Above. I'm James Brown. Thanks for listening. This is a show where we explore ideas big and small with fascinating people. And this week we're chatting with Barrett sports media columnist Ian Casselberry. We had a great conversation about baseball, broadcasting, and even Charles Barkley. And I can't wait to have him back to talk about God. You can follow my work at jamesbrowntv.substack.com or just about anywhere online at James Brown TV. This is a people-supported enterprise, so if you can, become a paid subscriber on Substack. Any new subscribers in the first 60 days of the show get 20% off for life. Part of that package comes our after show called 10 the Hard Way, 10 rapid-fire questions between me and a guest. And now, my chat with Ian Casselberry. Ian Casselberry, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, James. Great talking to you.
Great talking to you, too. You're a freelance writer?
Yes, sir.
I've done that. It's a hard life. Are you balancing multiple careers or multiple gigs? How does that work?
Yeah, not as many gigs as I would like right now, but I've found over, 10, 12 years of doing this, I feel like I do better when I'm juggling more than one thing. Feels like it kind of keeps me fresh if I'm doing some different things. I've mostly been in sports media the past few years. But in the past, when I've covered other sports, here I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I covered the Asheville Tourists for one season. Covering Major League Baseball here and there. I find it kind of keeps me fresh. I enjoy juggling the gigs, but you're right. It can be a struggle, and you always feel like you're chasing that paycheck. But I guess you're always chasing that paycheck, right?
Right. I feel like I'm chasing a paycheck. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I have to wonder, what's the attraction to sports media?
Sports media is something. That's a great question. It's always interested me, even as a young person. For some reason, we had I grew up in Metro Detroit in Ann Arbor, and we had a sports media column there, who was coming and going. It was the mid-1990s. We got sports talk radio in Detroit. And it's always been something that's interested me. If you notice that suddenly someone's on a different network or covering a different sport, or I think you whether you pay attention to the announcers or not, I think you tend to notice who you like and who you don't like, or who you prefer. As far as a career, I happen to write for Blogwin's baseball site, and they at the time Awful Announcing was under that umbrella. And they were the big site, the big cheese, big fish in that pond. And they asked me if I was interested in writing for them. And again, I've always had an interest in it. So when they asked if I was interested in doing some writing for them, I jumped at the opportunity, and it kind of took off from there.
I
the proliferation of debate talk shows on ESPN during the day. Yeah, you do have to be a geek about it, I think, because it is very niche. It's not like following a sport where you're just you have your favorite players, your favorite teams, you have spectacular games. You have to kind of get in the weeds a little bit, and but I think it's also some people who cover sports media, I think, actually aren't geeky enough, really, in terms of um, on your side, maybe you appreciate this. I mean, I think some people who cover sports media, whether full time or passing through, don't have enough of an idea of what's going on that side. How a broadcast is produced, what goes into being an announcer. What are you hearing in your ear? What are you getting from the truck? How do you follow certain moments? Or what is the technology involved in a broadcast? And I feel like if you're covering it, it helps to know. Now, maybe some people, including myself, have a little more interest in those sorts of things. But I think it's definitely helpful. A little bit of geekiness, I think, is helpful.
Some shots fired there.
No, I guess it came off that way. No, I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I've gotten emails from people on the executive side or the production side saying, well, this was really the case, and maybe you should have taken that into consideration. That reminds me, as a writer or a reporter, that maybe you should make that extra phone call, or maybe you think you don't have time to check some things, and maybe you should make that effort.
It seems that that's not done enough. If I'm catching your drift.
Sometimes there's just not time. I mean, especially a site like Awful Announcing. You're cranking out stories. There's not always time to check things, and in some cases, it's just you're aggregating news or you're passing along opinion. But when the opportunity is there to look a little deeper, I think we all should.
Amen to that. I want to slightly veer toward baseball. You covered it. I take it you're a long time fan first before you covered it?
Yeah. I grew up a fan of the Detroit Tigers, a fan of those 1980s Tigers teams. They won the World Series in '84. The
Sparky
American League
Anderson?
East. Yes. In 1987, they made it to the playoffs. Yeah, I've always had an interest in baseball. I don't know if maybe it was just the sport at the time that presented the best opportunity for writing. It wasn't necessarily, I think that there were some events kind of working into place. Like when I really did start to get into sports writing, part-time and then full-time, the Tigers were really good. So it was a good opportunity. And a blogger, and then I went to SB Nation, and that turned into an opportunity at Yahoo. But all the time, I think if I hadn't been so passionate about following the Tigers, that I don't know if I would have been or followed through as much on baseball. But I always have felt that most of the best sports writing has been in baseball. So even just a fan of sports writing, of storytelling, you find that a lot more, or you have in the past at least found that more in baseball.
My guess is the depth and breadth of it. Just thinking about the length of games. Obviously, they're working on condensing them now, but games go on for a long time. There's a bit of, I guess, baseball writers, at least they used to, and not, there's still some that do. They sort of look at sort of the poetry of the game more than say a basketball writer.
I think certainly the length of the games, but the length of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of quieter moments in the game that I think you're kind of wondering what's going on inside a hitter and batter's head, whereas opposed to, I think maybe that happens in basketball and football and hockey too. But sometimes I think those sports are just more instinct driven. Like you're not thinking as much about it. You see an opportunity, and you go toward the basket. And I think also just covering the sport day to day. I know a lot of writers will say it's not as much the case now as it used to be, especially post COVID. But I think baseball, because of the length of the day and the length of the season, there are often more opportunities to establish a bond with players, with managers, with coaches. Again, I don't know if this happens as much anymore, but you've heard stories in the past of managers kind of just hosting, having everybody in his office and trading stories and BSing about life or just telling some stories. And I don't think you get that same opportunity in other sports.
When I think about baseball, I think regional, and increasingly so. Why do you think that is?
I think that goes toward the length of the season. There are so many games, so many teams, so many different players. But when you follow a baseball team, when you're devoted to a baseball team, I mean, it's every night. It's your whole spring and summer and part of the fall, and it just becomes routine. And I think you become locked in, and it's harder to follow maybe the entire sport. I mean, ideally you see the other stars for the other teams when they play your team. But I think I think baseball allows its fans to maybe this is allowing it is the wrong way. I think baseball does a bad job of marketing its stars. So I think that kind of puts it on the fan to find out what it is they like about the sport or about their team. And I think that is part of what makes it regional. But we all have stories or memories of, like going camping or going to, like a summer cottage or out on the lake, and you're on the radio or you're listening in the car. Baseball, I think maybe certainly not as much as it used to be, but it used to be a very much a radio sport too. And I think that does have something to do with forming that bond with your team and a regional interest.
I want to step back to that statement you made about baseball marketing its stars, because there's a moment that I've heard talked about a lot over the last week or so. Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout squaring off in the World Baseball Classic. And honestly, it's the most I've heard people talk about an actual baseball game in quite some time. Maybe I'd say when Aaron Judge broke the record last year, but really outside of that, it's been quite some time. And I do, my mind tends to agree with you about baseball not positioning its stars as even true stars that transcend their own sport. We know that someone like Ohtani does amazing things, but it doesn't. It feels like they're in a similar problem with hockey, where we know someone like Connor McDavid is amazing, but there's not the depth and breadth of him like there seems to be with a LeBron James or Kevin Durant, even, or even a Joe Burrow or Pat Mahomes. And not that they're so deep in terms of their personal life being out there so much, but they feel larger.
Yeah. Well, with basketball, I mean, I think basketball has always accentuated the players, emphasize the stars, and I think social media has really amplified that, especially the players you mentioned, like Kevin Durant, LeBron James. They're on social media. They bond. They have a rapport with the fans, good or bad. And I don't really feel like you see that as much in baseball, which is a little bit strange because we're talking about how long the season is, how many games there are. Maybe it's harder to quantify or show. You can show a home run, you can show a great pitch. Maybe part of the problem is that in recent years, with strikeouts up so much and the shift being prevalent, baseball hasn't had as much opportunity for players to show their athleticism. And that's something I think in basketball and football, if all else, you can show a great dunk, you can show a block, you can show a steal, you can show a great run or a jump for a touchdown. And it's maybe a little bit more limited in baseball. Certainly, again, you can show a home run, you can show an outstanding curveball, but it seems like there are fewer instances of seeing, say, a great catch in center field or somebody going deep in the hole at shortstop to make a great throw. And I think those are the plays that baseball needs to emphasize. They need to show. You mentioned Mike Trout, and he's been the best player in baseball, though on a national basis, I'm not sure enough people think that or know that. And I don't know if it's because baseball can't show what makes Mike Trout so great, like, that he can do everything: hit for power, hit for average, speed, defense, throwing. Now, baseball itself would say, well, Mike Trout isn't exactly helping us out, which is sort of an eye-rolling statement. Yet maybe you can see where they're coming from too. Is that you don't see Mike Trout on TV, say, like maybe Peyton Manning's a bad example since he's not a player. Well, you mentioned Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is very much out there. He shows his personality. He whether it's really what he's like or not, you see him in those State Farm commercials, and you feel like the guy. And you don't see that as much in baseball. There are some guys who have that potential. Tim Anderson of the Chicago White Sox is somebody that comes to mind. But I just baseball, maybe it's because they've always depended on the fact that we all play baseball growing up, or at least we used to, and they have felt they don't need to explain why somebody is great. With Shohei Ohtani, you can say, well, he can hit and he can pitch. But I don't feel like baseball, whether it's baseball itself or maybe the media, has said, we all think, God, wouldn't it be great to have watched Babe Ruth play, pitching and hitting? And we have it. And I feel like the sport doesn't really push that enough.
Yeah, it seems like their star-making machine might be broken.
And that might tie into the regionality, the regional interest you were talking about too. I don't know if this is something we can get into. I don't necessarily think it helps baseball that some of its best players play on the West Coast.
Oh, yeah.
Now I know that's East Coast bias, and with MLB TV and MLB Network, you can see highlights and you can see those plays. But, if the majority of the population, the sports watching population, is in the Eastern and Central time zones, Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, as they're playing when most of us are going to bed.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, we can certainly get into it. I mean, I know that there's been conversations about that even with basketball, right? I remember when LeBron James went west, right? And there was just this dearth of star power in the East. And and I think there's been this consistent. I think it's one of those things that it's weird because a league can't make that consideration, right? Because it's up to the player, it's up to the teams, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you always hear conspiracy theories about pushing players to certain cities, right? Big cities. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's the counter argument. You would say, did it hurt the NBA when LeBron went to Los Angeles? Maybe not, but I mean, he certainly went to one of the sport's biggest teams,
Mhm.
and a big city. It's not like LeBron went to play for Sacramento or um, a team with a little bit less glitz.
Mhm.
That's a good question. Is the NBA fan more prone to staying up late,
It
or again, it's easier to show
Yeah.
LeBron's greatness in a highlight package on Sports Center maybe than it is Mike Trout or Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, precisely. That's why I don't I think it's unlikely to believe, to me at least, that NBA fan would be more likely to, be okay with a 10 p.m. start than a baseball fan. That seems a little like like that doesn't make any sense. Um,
Right.
there must be something else going on. I and I struggle with that, and I think that this sort of ties in to both the what's going on with original sports networks and sort of how baseball is nationally projected and
Mhm.
broadcast. There's it seems like the showcases for the sport have sort of not vanished. Vanish is a little bit stronger word, but it seems like they're secondary.
I definitely agree. Baseball. Another big problem with baseball is that nationally it just doesn't register. We've been talking about it being a regional sport, but look, I mean, it doesn't get the play on ESPN that it used to. Whether it's the game broadcast itself or Baseball Tonight seems increasingly buried at late hours, or it's more of a special rather than a daily show. Um, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, maybe even up until the 2000s, Baseball Tonight was Baseball Tonight. You
Sure.
watch that show every night or in the evening. And now, I mean, you have ESPN, you have TBS, you have Fox, but those Fox broadcasts are often on FS1, and I this will probably make me sound old, but I think some people still don't know where FS1 is on their cable system. I still have to think about it, which is maybe
Sure.
embarrassing to admit. But I mean, compare that to the NBA, especially. The NBA does such a good job of being a national sport. Like TNT, they make their Thursday night broadcasts, their Tuesday broadcasts an event, and a big part of that is having a studio show that is much must watch television. And baseball doesn't really have that. They have during the postseason, I think they have something close to that with the Fox and the TBS studio shows, and you have some great personalities, some fun moments that can go viral. But you don't have that during the regular season. Same with football and NFL Live on ESPN, and but
Mhm.
of course the pregame shows on the networks. Baseball just doesn't have any of that, and I think there is a lack of a national showcase. Maybe that's because we're so used to watching football, or maybe just sitting watching a baseball game on a Saturday afternoon, as those of us who are older may have grown up on game of the week
Mhm.
and so forth. But that just doesn't have the appeal anymore. And national networks seem less interested in showing baseball. ESPN got rid of their midweek broadcast. Turner took over. They're going to do Tuesday night games, but it still doesn't feel like the destination that the NBA does there.
So I wonder if this is so the volume game of baseball, just to having so many games, it made their regional sports networks way profitable. And for
Mhm.
those who don't know, these sports networks are the largest of them, the behemoth is something like Yes, um,
Right.
or in my neck of the woods, I live in Western New York. We have MSG, or at least the Western New York version of MSG. There's a downstate version of MSG as well, and there's variations of these across the country, and they sort of, as baseball sort of faded away from the national sense, they've picked up so much of the slack. And go ahead.
No. Go finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Well, they picked up so much of the slack and have been a destination for basically not just baseball, but for hockey and basketball as well. Only basketball has that national profile, hockey less so. So, and they've been destinations ratings wise, and it's been this sort of this natural sort of winner in this in this old archaic system. And as it breaks down and with no national profile, and it seems like soon less of a regional profile, where the hell is everybody going to go?
But you're really going to test fans' loyalty and their appetite for, as we seem to be going more toward streaming and getting rid of cable. I mean, the people who really, if you really want to watch the Phillies, maybe they're not one of the regional sports networks that's in danger. They're not a Bally's team. So let's look at the Braves, for instance. Like if Bally's Sports South, or Bally's in general, but Bally's Sports South were to go bankrupt and somehow go off the air, then Braves fans, like those who want to watch the team, they'll pick up a streaming package. Is that going to be now the price point? I think that's a big problem for people. Can you justify $20 a month? I mean, Netflix doesn't cost that much. Disney Plus doesn't cost that much. Paramount Plus, can you justify it and say, it's 6 months. We can do that, but still, it's not the same as just like, I'm flipping around, or the Braves are on tonight. I guess I'll watch that. Like, it's just on. You don't have to make such a devoted decision to it. And this is something I wrote about a couple of weeks ago. Not just that, if you go strictly to that model, the Braves, for instance, they're not going to generate as much revenue if getting people to buy it on streaming versus if they get a cable network to pay them, millions of dollars. And I think, that changed the sport, because these regional sports networks, they needed the inventory, they needed the catalog, they wanted live sports, because that's the programming you can't DVR, right? Because the game's happening then, and they you have a whole spring, summer, fall of programming of nighttime game broadcasts to fill, and because of that, sports networks would pay millions of dollars, and that kind of leveled the playing field in baseball, because you mentioned the Yankees and Yes Network. The Yankees used to have a huge advantage because they would get millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars from their network, from Yes Network, and they had so much more revenue from that compared to, say, the Detroit Tigers. But then, the Tigers, Fox Sports at the time, now Bally's, is coming, giving them a bunch of money, and suddenly they can compete. They can pay. They can put up the payroll and compete with the Yankees. I mean, you've seen teams. The Texas Rangers are a team that comes to mind. Is that the Rangers weren't necessarily as competitive from a revenue standpoint in the 80s and 90s, maybe, but they got a huge cable package, a huge amount of revenue from Fox Sports, then Bally's, and suddenly they're able to pay major contracts and get with the large market teams in baseball.
I'm thinking about the wider effect of it. I didn't grow up a hardcore baseball fan. I remember I was into the Orioles for a while. Like they were their AAA affiliate were here in Rochester where I live.
That's right.
And I used to love Brady Anderson. And then my heart was broken as we learned that man took more roids than anyone on earth. But for the most part, I haven't been a big fan. I'm a passive fan, and I think that's the biggest thing that from your response there that I take away. I think there's a massive risk in losing that passive fan, that fan that maybe would have listened to radio, but now they're not listening to radio now, not in the same levels as we did before. And if it's not going to be on television and widely available, how are they going to be exposed to this? Just social media? But even social media seems you're in your own little world there, a world of your choosing.
I think baseball's making it harder. We saw this last year. Baseball thought it was great because they were getting new sources of revenue from Apple TV, from Peacock, these streaming packages, and it's great from a revenue standpoint. And maybe it's kind of cool to have your team on a showcase on a Friday night or a Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. But if you don't have either of those platforms and you tell people, that they've been used to just being able to turn on their local cable network or even their local TV network and seeing the game. And now you're saying, okay, well, you can't see the Yankees play the Red Sox tonight. It's on Apple TV. Well, how do I watch that? Well, you got to sign up for Apple TV. You got to pay for Apple TV. It's one of 162 games. I'm not going to do that. So I think baseball has made a money grab and kind of forgotten about the fan experience in that regard. Apple TV, they made it free. You sign up for Apple TV. You didn't have to pay for an account. That's changing this year. You have to pay to watch it. To go down another path, I think Apple TV made a mistake by trying to be maybe a little too innovative, if that's the right word. I think they tried too hard to be different with their baseball broadcasts, and it turned off a lot of fans. I mean, I think ultimately fans say they want something new in sports broadcasting on the telecast, and they do like innovations, but ultimately they just want the game. They just want the details. They don't want the bells and whistles to overtake anything. So, Apple, they had that probability thing in the corner, but didn't really explain it. They would have people who didn't normally broadcast baseball, like Katie Nolan, thinking maybe that her social media following would get people to watch. But people, they just want you to tell them, they call play-by-play, balls and strikes. Why did this happen? Compare that to you watch Fox and John Smoltz is explaining how a pitcher sequences a hitter. Like, okay, you're throwing this pitch, which leads to this pitch, which leads to this pitch. And it helps you learn the game. You're not necessarily getting that when you're trying to be clever, but you're not informing the viewer.
So we want iterations, but not too much iterations.
Yeah. How do you see it, James, as a TV viewer? I mean, you want different angles on replays and things like that, but really you just want ultimately, right? I mean, you want Mahomes passes to Hardman.
Sure.
That's a first down. And then here's the replay and you see, okay, Hardman got open because he did a double move and Mahomes looked off the safety, so forth. And then boom, you're off to the next play. You're not like, does it make the broadcast better if you have a camera in Hardman's helmet and you see maybe that seems kind of cool, but I mean, it adds something, but does it inform you? And I think viewers like to be informed.
I tend to agree with you on that one. Viewers do like to be informed. I think I am a bit more for innovation than most viewers, but not to the Nickelodeon broadcast level. Or
I'm laughing because I really enjoyed the Nickelodeon broadcast, but I mean,
it was fun, but
serious.
It was definitely fun, but like it was not. I didn't feel like I was watching football. I felt like I was watching a video game.
Yeah. You know, this is actually, we're talking about innovations in broadcast. This is actually something that baseball did more last season, but a little bit before that. And that's miking the players up in the field. Mm-hmm. That really added something to the broadcast.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, it gave viewers something that they, you know, you always wonder, what are those guys saying to each other at first base? Or, you know, what are they thinking when they're out there in the outfield and a ball hasn't been hit to them in 3 innings or something like that. So we got some insight. It allowed the players to show some personality. And so I think that was an innovation that, you know, of course you have some grumps who don't like that or think it takes away from the broadcast. But that's an example of an innovation that's not that intrusive, but it's different enough to give the viewers something they hadn't seen or heard before. And that maybe that's baseball's ticket into, you know, we don't see the baseball player's personality as much as we do in basketball and football. And if you get a glimpse of that, you know, like Joey Votto suddenly is the most interesting man in the world.
Sure.
Because we heard him mic'd at first base the past couple seasons. That's a great thing for baseball. And that's an example of an innovation that works, I think.
Speaking of Joey Votto, it's at a side, but he's one of the best interviews I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Have you heard him on Dan Patrick's show?
I have. He is, I mean, this is kind of a cliche phrase, but he is an interesting cat, right? I mean, he doesn't just have the platitudes. He seems like he really thinks about these things. You know, you've probably experienced this too. Sometimes you interview athletes and you think you come up with this great question.
Sure.
And you're like, oh, I can't wait to ask this and get the answer. And then you ask it and it just becomes apparent they haven't put as much thought into this as you did with your question, because they're just great athletes and they instinctively, you know, like, I just hit the ball, you know, or I'm just trying to make the team. I'm just trying, you know, whereas somebody like Joey Votto, they have put that much thought into it. They want to be interesting. They're not just a jock. And Joey Votto maybe is a unique player in that regard, because he hasn't always been the same player. You know, he's changed his swing over the years. So again, this goes back to the thought, you know, okay, how do I hit for more power? Or people say, you know, I don't get enough runs batted in. So how do I get more RBI in situations? How do I change my swing to make more contact? And Votto's gift is that he is able to articulate that and explain it to a journalist, to a viewer, whereas not just saying, well, yeah, that's something me and my coach are working on.
He's the number one prospect for me for a Barkley style role.
Oh yeah. Wow. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. That's something else baseball needs. You know, we talked about the studio show. Yeah. They need somebody like a Joey Votto. Now, will he have the platform or the outlet? Maybe if ESPN or TBS gives him that. I mean, I don't think MLB Network is
it's not big enough.
Right. It's not big enough. It's still not on some platforms. But you're right. That's a great example. If Joey Votto can be a Charles Barkley type personality for Major League Baseball, that would be great for the sport. I
think that Barkley coming to broadcasting right at the end of right as Jordan's era ended. I believe he started on TNT in 99.
Wow. So yeah.
and it was a boom for the game. And his both A can explain things well when he tries, and when he's not trying, he's funny as hell.
Yeah, he's not afraid to say something controversial, something that might get him in a little bit of trouble. Whether it's because that's just really what he thinks, or he's not afraid to go for the laugh. Like talking about big women in San Antonio or something.
Yeah.
But then he says it, and you see how Shaq reacts, and it's a ripple effect from there.
Yeah, from your perspective, what's your thoughts on Shaq as a broadcaster?
He's not my favorite on the inside the NBA crew, but I think he certainly doesn't take himself too seriously. He is willing to poke fun at himself, to make fun of himself, and he's been, especially in recent years, a little bit more critical of players. But I think he couldn't have Barkley's role. He needs Barkley and Kenny Smith and Ernie Johnson to play off of. So if you want to call that a weakness, I guess that's a weakness, that he needs his teammates to set him up, really, and good producers. But he's certainly improved. I mean, I used to think he was the weakest part of that broadcast. Maybe, I guess in some ways he still is, but he also does some must see, like, is he going to race Kenny to the board and trip over his microphone cord and fall off the platform? I mean, you tune in just for that, right?
It is interesting to see him sort of as a side piece or I think you're absolutely right. He's not. I could not see them building an entire broadcast team around him. I don't think he has that kind of depth. At least I haven't seen it yet.
Even on his podcasts, right? Like, he needs who is it? Nichelle Turner, who hosts his podcast. I mean, he needs a more dynamic host who will banter with him, or he has Ernie Johnson or Kenny Smith on there. Yeah, I don't think a Shaq podcast where it's just Shaq and a microphone like Draymond Green, I don't think that would be very good.
Well, he's another interesting character. What do you think of him?
He definitely wants to be media. He wants to be the next Charles Barkley, and he's pretty good at it. I mean, it's funny in some ways how much he cares about his podcast, like especially during the playoffs. You can almost see his teammates or his coaches, like, what are you doing? But I mean, I could also see from his standpoint, like, yeah, I got some thoughts on tonight's game, but you're going to have to tune into my podcast. I'm not just going to give this to you in a quote.
Yeah.
That is, if you want to call it, like, he'll call it new media. That is something that's definitely changed the dynamic between media and athlete. But Draymond has a bright future. I think TNT is extremely fortunate that if and when Charles Barkley finally retires, that Draymond Green can sit in that chair, and he'll never be another Charles Barkley. We're never going to have another Charles Barkley, but somebody who's pretty close, who can sit in that chair and be entertaining 2-3 times a week.
Charles has been threatening retirement for the last 20 years. I think he's going to die on that set.
He likes it too much, right? Now there's these stories that he might do CNN once a week with Gayle King.
That seems like a terrible idea.
It does. Yeah, Charles Barkley, I mean, I don't know. Is he somebody you want to hear talk about everything? I mean, it's interesting that he has opinions about politics and things outside of basketball, but you put him on a show where he's not going to talk about basketball. Is he going to show that he's out of his element in some ways, or not as informed?
My gut reaction is that I would want to hear him talk about it, but not with Gayle King.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know their chemistry. Maybe they have amazing crackling chemistry and we just don't know. But I would doubt it.
That's a good question because Gayle King tends to be kind of a dominant, I'm the boss here kind of personality.
That doesn't
That
work.
you have to. I mean, you just look at her career. Like if you haven't played ball, so to speak, with Gayle King, like Nora O'Donnell or whoever, that
Sure.
boom, you're off the set, you're off the show. So yeah, you must be right. They must have some chemistry, or whether or not they've in regular life that people know. Chris Licht and the producers at CNN think this is something that could work. But yeah, just like, just saying, well, she's a great personality and he's very outspoken, and so let's put them on a show together. I mean, that's not always the formula for success.
And on the CNN side, it seems like a strange experiment. If I'm thinking with cable news, I understand they're under pressure. CNN's ratings have been in the tank. They're falling to a distant third at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they're going to be turned around by a 1 day a week show.
No. I mean, you're setting it up so you have to have what? You not only have to have one good show that people are going to tune into, but now you're saying, okay, we have to come up with 4, right? Because we need, like, okay, we have something on Tuesday, we have Gayle and Chuck on Wednesday. Now we need something on Thursday. That's really tough to do, yeah.
And it's not the cable news way typically.
Isn't that why they got rid of Larry King? Because, I mean, yeah, he did good interviews, but then what about, okay, we're bombing, we just invaded Iraq, and Larry King shouldn't be anchoring that coverage. I mean, that's going to happen on CNN, right?
Yeah, but I think you roll with it. Like, I think from what I remember, they usually included him in the coverage. They wouldn't like make him central to it. They'd have him do an interview, or talk to correspondents for that hour, if it was a big event. But not make it like a typical Larry King, celebrity interview,
Maybe that's one reason why Gayle and Charles Barkley would be a good fit, because you could see Gayle King doing that, right?
Sure.
Like she could kind of anchor.
Yeah.
But like if there's a school shooting, I don't know how much you want to hear from Charles Barkley in that situation.
Yeah, that would be a strange situation to put him then. He's had some good moments when dealing with some heavy issues, but
yeah, that's true. That's true.
What do you want to do that regularly? That seems strange. It seems like, why would you want to? You're already signed a massive contract with TNT. To not do that, why add that to your plate? It seems a bit.
Is it just too good opportunity to say no to? Is that what it is? I mean, if CNN offered me a show, I'm not going to say no. They think I can do it, so I'm going to do it.
You and me too.
Yeah. Anyone listening to this, if you.
So, Ian, any famous last words?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on. It's been great talking to you. We've been talking about the struggle of baseball and waning fandom, and I struggle with that myself. I don't write as much about baseball as I used to. I don't watch as much baseball as I used to. Part of that's because the Tigers are my team, and they've been terrible in recent seasons. Maybe part of it is just getting old, and like I got to devote how much time each night to baseball. But I still love the sport. I loved seeing the attention that baseball got during the World Baseball Classic. I think it does show that when there is a big event, and maybe some of that is USA, We're always going to root for our country. But when there are big moments and spectacular players to be watched in baseball, it's still a riveting sport.
Well, Ian Casselberry, thank you for joining me.
James, thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to all of the above. Let me know what you think at James Brown TV on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, or at jamesbrowntv@gmail.com. You can follow my work at jamesbrowntv.substack.com. This is a people-supported enterprise, so if you can, become a paid subscriber. All subscribers in our first 60 days get 20% off for life. It's a great deal. But for now, I'm James Brown. And as always, be well.